First story, Frozen in the Alien Gaze, Vietnam, 1973. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after all these years, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It was 1973, and I was a young soldier stationed in Vietnam. The jungle heat was oppressive. The air thick with humidity and the constant buzz of insects. Our platoon had been on edge for days, moving through the dense foliage, always on high alert for Viet Cong ambushes. Little did we know that on that fateful day, we'd encounter something far beyond our worst nightmares. The morning started like any other. We got up before dawn, ate our tasteless rations, and began our patrol. The tension was palpable as we moved silently through the undergrowth, our eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from all around us. We'd walked right into a Viet Cong ambush. Chaos ensued as we scrambled for cover, the air filled with the deafening sound of gunshots and shouting. I remember the acrid smell of gunpowder and the feeling of my heart pounding in my chest. But just as quickly as it had started, everything changed in an instant. As I crouched behind a fallen tree, my rifle clutched tightly to my chest, I saw it. At first I thought it was some kind of hallucination brought on by the stress of combat. A massive, oval-shaped object appeared in the sky above the treetops. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, sleek, metallic, and completely silent. The gunfire stopped abruptly as both sides seemed to notice the strange craft hovering above us. That's when the real horror began. I tried to call out to my fellow soldiers, to ask if they were seeing what I was seeing, but I couldn't move. It was as if every muscle in my body had suddenly turned to stone. I couldn't even blink. The panic that washed over me in that moment is indescribable. I was completely aware of my surroundings, could see and hear everything, but I was utterly paralyzed. I could see the fear in the eyes of my comrades, frozen in various positions of combat. Even the Viet Cong soldiers we had been fighting moments ago were stuck in place, their faces contorted in silent screams. Time seemed to stretch on forever as we all stood there, helpless and immobile. The only thing that moved was that otherworldly craft slowly rotating above us. It emitted no sound, no lights, nothing to indicate what it was or where it had come from. I tried desperately to move, to call out, to do anything, but it was useless. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Were we being abducted, experimented on? Was this some new, horrific weapon? The fear and helplessness I felt in those moments were overwhelming. I couldn't even close my eyes to shut out the sight of that impossible object hovering above us. All I could do was stare, my eyes burning from the strain of not blinking, as the seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly. I don't know exactly how long we were frozen like that, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, I later learned it was about 10 minutes, though that hardly seems possible given how long it felt in the moment. As suddenly as it had appeared, the craft began to move. It ascended slowly at first, then with incredible speed, vanishing into the sky in the blink of an eye. The moment it disappeared, I felt control return to my body. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, my muscles screaming in pain from being locked in one position for so long. Around me, I could hear the sounds of my fellow soldiers groaning and retching. The relief of being able to move again was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. As I struggled to my feet, I realized that something was terribly wrong. Some of the men, both American and Viet Cong, were still frozen in place. Their eyes darted around wildly, showing they were conscious, but their bodies remained as still as statues. It was a horrifying sight, watching these men trapped in their own bodies, unable to speak or move. The look of sheer terror in their eyes is something that still haunts my nightmares to this day. In the chaos that followed, we completely forgot about the battle we had been fighting. Both sides worked together to try and help those who were still paralyzed. We shook them, shouted at them, even tried to physically move their limbs, but nothing worked. It was as if their muscles had turned to stone. The sound of approaching helicopters added to the confusion. As they landed in a nearby clearing, medics rushed out to assess the situation. I remember trying to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane, even as I spoke them. How could I describe the impossible thing we had all witnessed? The looks of disbelief on the faces of the newly arrived soldiers only added to my growing sense of unreality. As we evacuated the affected soldiers, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had been irreversibly changed. The war, which had seemed so all-consuming just hours before, now felt insignificant in comparison to what we had experienced. In the days and weeks that followed, I was questioned repeatedly about what had happened. Military officials, doctors, and scientists all wanted to know every detail of our encounter. But no matter how many times I recounted the story, no one seemed to have any answers. The soldiers who had remained paralyzed were subjected to countless tests and examinations, but nothing could explain their condition or how to reverse it. Some of them eventually regained movement, but others remained in that catatonic state indefinitely. The guilt I felt for being one of the lucky ones who had recovered was overwhelming. Why had I been spared when others weren't? What made me different? These questions tormented me, adding to the already crushing weight of PTSD and survivor's guilt that I carried home from the war. The official explanation given to the public was that it had been some sort of chemical weapon attack, but those of us who were there knew the truth. We had encountered something beyond human understanding, something that defied all explanation. The years following the incident were a blur of nightmares, therapy sessions, and unanswered questions. I struggled to readjust to civilian life, constantly haunted by the memory of that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that metallic oval hovering silently above the trees. The worst part was the feeling of helplessness that would wash over me, triggering panic attacks that left me gasping for air. I couldn't shake the fear that at any moment I might become paralyzed again, trapped in my own body like those poor souls we left behind. I tried to reach out to other survivors, hoping to find some solace in shared experience, but many had retreated into themselves, unwilling or unable to talk about what had happened. Those who did speak often had conflicting memories of the event, as if our minds were trying to protect us from the full truth of what we'd witnessed. As time passed, I became obsessed with finding answers. I pored over every book, article, and declassified document I could find about UFO encounters and alien abductions. The more I researched, the more I realized that our experience wasn't unique. There were countless reports of similar incidents from around the world, people experiencing lost time, paralysis, and encounters with unexplainable craft. But none of these stories could fully capture the terror of what we had gone through. I started attending UFO conferences and support groups for alien abductees, hoping to find someone who could help me make sense of it all. While I found some comfort in knowing I wasn't alone, I also encountered a lot of skepticism and ridicule. Many people simply couldn't believe that something like this could happen, especially not to an entire platoon of soldiers in the middle of a war zone. One night, about 5 years after the incident, I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I had been having the same nightmare I'd had countless times before, reliving that day in the jungle. But this time, something was different. In my dream, I could move. I watched as the craft descended closer to us, a beam of light emerging from its underside. And then, to my horror, I saw myself and several others being lifted off the ground, pulled towards the light. The dream felt so real, so vivid, that I began to question whether it was a dream at all. Could it be a repressed memory? Had more happened that day than I could consciously recall? These questions gnawed at me, adding a new layer of anxiety to my already fragile mental state. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to our encounter than what we had experienced on the surface. That perhaps some of us had been taken aboard that craft and then returned with our memories wiped clean. The possibility of missing time and hidden memories consumed me. I sought out hypnotherapy, desperate to uncover any buried truths about that day. The sessions were intense and often terrifying. Under hypnosis, I experienced flashes of being inside a sterile white room. I felt cold metal against my skin and saw large dark eyes staring down at me. But were these real memories or just products of my overactive imagination, fueled by years of research into alien abduction stories? I couldn't be sure, and the uncertainty only added to my distress. The hypnotherapist warned me about the dangers of false memories, but I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the truth, no matter how horrifying it might be. As the years went by, I tried to move on with my life. I got married, had kids, and built a career. But the incident in Vietnam was always there, lurking in the background. I became hypervigilant, always watching the sky, half expecting to see that oval craft appear at any moment. My family tried to be understanding, but I could see the toll my obsession was taking on them. I started to withdraw, spending more and more time alone in my study, poring over my research and notes. I couldn't explain to them why this was so important to me, why I couldn't just let it go. How could I make them understand the sheer terror of being completely paralyzed, helpless as an unknown force exerted its will upon you? The isolation I felt was overwhelming, like I was carrying a burden that no one else could possibly comprehend. Then, about 15 years after the incident, something happened that reignited all my old fears and questions. I received a letter from one of the men who had been left in a catatonic state after our encounter. Miraculously, he had suddenly regained consciousness after more than a decade of being unresponsive. His letter was rambling and difficult to follow, but certain phrases jumped out at me. "They're still watching us. It wasn't over when we thought it was. They're coming back." My hand shook as I read his words, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Was this just the confused ramblings of a man whose mind had been trapped for years? Or did he know something the rest of us had forgotten? I immediately booked a flight to the VA hospital where he was being treated, determined to speak with him face to face and finally get some answers. The reunion with my former comrade was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Seeing him in that hospital bed, his body wasted away from years of inactivity, was a stark reminder of how differently our lives had turned out after that fateful day. As I sat by his bedside, he gripped my hand with surprising strength, his eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear and urgency. In hushed tones, he began to tell me about the things he had experienced during his years of paralysis. According to him, his mind had remained fully aware the entire time, trapped in an unresponsive body. But more than that, he claimed to have been in constant communication with the beings responsible for our encounter. He described them as tall, ethereal creatures with large, almond-shaped eyes and telepathic abilities. The details he provided were so vivid, so specific, that it was hard to dismiss them as mere hallucinations. As he spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. He described ongoing experiments, mental probes, and a grand plan that involved humanity's future. According to him, what happened to us in Vietnam was just the beginning, a test run for something much larger. He warned of future events, of more encounters to come, each more intense than the last. Part of me wanted to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a damaged mind, but another part recognized the ring of truth in them. It aligned too closely with the fragments of memories I had recovered in my own hypnotherapy sessions. As I left the hospital that day, my mind was reeling. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to uncover a truth that would change everything. But I also felt a deep sense of dread, wondering if some truths were better left buried. In the weeks that followed my visit to the hospital, strange things began to happen. I started experiencing vivid dreams, or were they memories, of being back in that oval craft. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my body drenched in sweat, feeling as if I had just returned from somewhere far away. Objects in my house would be moved, or I would find myself in rooms with no recollection of how I got there. The line between reality and whatever otherworldly experience we had encountered began to blur. I found myself questioning everything. My memories, my perceptions, even my own sanity. Were these experiences real, or was my mind finally fracturing under the weight of years of trauma and obsession? I couldn't be sure, and that uncertainty was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. As I sit here now writing this account, I still don't have any concrete answers. All I know is that something profound and inexplicable happened to us in that jungle all those years ago, something that defies conventional explanation. And despite the passage of time, despite my best efforts to move on and forget, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Whatever force we encountered that day, whatever beings were behind that craft, I believe they're still out there. And sometimes, in the dead of night when the world is quiet, I swear I can hear the faint hum of that oval craft, reminding me that at any moment everything could change again. Second story, Transformed Beyond Words, Gulf War, 1991. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. It's been years since that fateful day during the Gulf War, and the memories still haunt me. I was just a young soldier back then, full of pride and naive enthusiasm. Our unit had been deployed to the scorching deserts of Iraq, and we were tasked with routine patrols. Little did I know that one particular patrol would change my life forever. It was a typical day, or so I thought. The sun beat down mercilessly on our helmets as we trudged through the endless sea of sand. The air was thick with dust, and the constant hum of military vehicles in the distance was our only companion. I remember feeling uneasy that morning, like something was off, but I chalked it up to the stress of being in a war zone. If only I had listened to my gut instinct. As we moved further from our base, the landscape began to shift subtly. The dunes seemed to grow taller, casting long shadows that didn't quite match the position of the sun. I blinked, wondering if the heat was playing tricks on my eyes. That's when I noticed the silence. The ever-present background noise of the war had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. I turned to mention this to my buddy, but the words died in my throat. He was gone. They were all gone. One moment, I was surrounded by my fellow soldiers, and the next, I was completely alone in the vast expanse of the desert. Panic set in as I spun around, desperately searching for any sign of my unit. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out even my own frantic shouts. The sand beneath my feet seemed to shift and move, as if it were alive. I stumbled, my boots sinking deeper with each step. That's when I saw it. A shimmer in the air, like heat waves, but more defined. It was moving towards me, rippling the very fabric of reality. I raised my rifle, but my fingers felt numb and unresponsive. The shimmer engulfed me, and the world as I knew it dissolved into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and shapes. I felt weightless, my body stretching and contorting in ways that should have been agonizing. But I felt nothing. Time lost all meaning in that moment. I could have been floating in that void for seconds or centuries. When I came to, I was lying, face down in the sand. The familiar weight of my gear was gone, replaced by a strange tingling sensation all over my body. I pushed myself up, spitting out grit, and froze. The desert was gone. In its place was a landscape that defied description. Crystalline structures that pulsed with internal light, spiraling towers that seemed to be made of liquid metal, and a sky that shimmered with colors I had no names for. Fear gripped me as I realized I was no longer on Earth. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound that came out was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was melodic, almost beautiful, but utterly alien. I clapped my hands over my mouth, terrified by my own voice. That's when I noticed my hands. They were mine, but not mine. My skin had a faint, iridescent sheen to it, and my fingers seemed longer, more graceful. What had they done to me? I staggered to my feet, my body feeling both familiar and foreign at the same time. In the distance I saw figures moving. They were tall, impossibly slender, with limbs that bent in ways that made my mind recoil. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that these were the beings responsible for my abduction. And as they glided towards me with an otherworldly grace, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. As the alien beings approached, I felt a strange mix of terror and fascination. Their movements were hypnotic, almost fluid, as if they were gliding rather than walking. I wanted to run, to hide, but my body refused to obey. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot as they surrounded me. Their faces, if you could call them that, were featureless, save for large, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me or through me, but I felt exposed, as if they could see every thought, every memory, every fear coursing through my mind. One of them reached out with a long, slender appendage. I flinched, expecting pain, but instead felt a gentle touch on my forehead. In that instant, a flood of information poured into my brain. Images, sounds, and concepts that my human mind struggled to comprehend flashed before my eyes. I saw vast cities built in impossible geometries, creatures that defied the laws of biology as I knew them, and technology so advanced it seemed like magic. The sensory overload was too much. I felt my consciousness slipping away, my mind unable to process the sheer volume of alien knowledge being forced upon it. When I came to, I was in a room, if you could call it that. The walls pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent glow, and the floor seemed to shift and move beneath me, adapting to my every movement. I realized with a start that I was naked, my military uniform gone. My skin still had that strange, shimmering quality to it, and I could feel something different inside me, as if my very DNA had been altered. Time became meaningless in that place. I had no way to measure how long I was held captive. The aliens would come and go, performing what I can only assume were experiments or examinations. They never spoke, at least not in any way I could understand, but I felt their intentions. They were curious, studying me like a scientist might study a fascinating new specimen. Sometimes they would touch my head again, and more information would flood my mind. Other times they would manipulate my body in ways that should have been painful but weren't. I felt myself changing, both physically and mentally, becoming something other. The worst part wasn't the experiments or the alien environment. It was the loneliness. I was completely cut off from everything I knew, everything that made me human. I tried to hold on to memories of home, of my family, of my life before, but they began to feel distant, like half-remembered dreams. The alien language that had replaced my own became more natural, and I found myself thinking in strange, abstract concepts that I couldn't have comprehended before. I started to forget what it felt like to be human, and that terrified me more than anything else. One day, or what passed for a day in that timeless place, something changed. The aliens seemed agitated, their movements more hurried. They gathered around me, their large eyes blinking rapidly. I felt a surge of something, not quite emotion, but a transfer of intent. They were sending me back. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by dread. How long had I been gone? What had they done to me? Would I ever be the same? Before I could process these thoughts, that familiar shimmer enveloped me. The alien world dissolved around me, replaced by the dizzying kaleidoscope of the void. I felt my body twisting, changing, reforming. When the world solidified again, I was back in the desert, the hot sun beating down on my skin. But I wasn't the same person who had disappeared. I was something else entirely, trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. I stumbled through the desert, my mind reeling from the abrupt transition. The familiar landscape of sand and sky felt alien to me now, almost as strange as the world I'd left behind. My body felt wrong, too heavy and too light at the same time. I tried to call out for help, but the sounds that came from my mouth were a garbled mix of human speech and that haunting, melodic alien language. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't communicate. I wandered for what felt like hours, the sun tracking across the sky, until I finally spotted a military vehicle in the distance. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As the vehicle approached and soldiers poured out, their expressions shifted from concern to confusion to fear. They trained their weapons on me, shouting commands that I could barely understand. I tried to explain, to tell them who I was, but my words came out as an incomprehensible jumble of sounds. They took me into custody, treating me like a threat rather than a rescued comrade. I was whisked away to a secure facility, subjected to endless tests and interrogations. Doctors examined me, baffled by the changes in my physiology. My skin still had that faint iridescent sheen, and scans revealed subtle alterations to my internal organs and brain structure. Linguists were brought in, attempting to decipher the strange language I now spoke. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't revert to English or any other human language. It was as if that part of my brain had been completely rewritten. The frustration and fear were overwhelming. I could understand everything they were saying, but I couldn't respond in a way they could comprehend. I saw the suspicion in their eyes, the way they looked at me as if I were some kind of imposter or spy. In a way, I couldn't blame them. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Days turned into weeks, and still, no progress was made in establishing communication. I was kept in isolation, monitored constantly. The only interactions I had were with doctors, scientists, and military personnel, all of whom treated me with a mix of fascination and fear. I tried to convey my experiences through drawings, but the alien landscapes and beings I sketched only seemed to increase their suspicion. At night, when I was alone in my sterile room, the memories of that other world would flood back. I'd dream of crystalline cities and impossible creatures, waking up with a sense of longing that I couldn't explain. Part of me missed it, that alien realm where I had been transformed, but another part, the dwindling human part, was terrified by this feeling. I was losing myself, caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. The worst part was the loneliness. Even surrounded by people, I felt completely isolated. No one could understand me, and I couldn't understand why this had happened to me. I yearned for connection, for someone to look at me and see a person, not a puzzle to be solved or a threat to be contained. As weeks stretched into months, my existence became a monotonous blur of tests, interrogations, and isolation. The military had classified my case as top secret, effectively erasing my identity. I was no longer a soldier, no longer even a person in their eyes, just an anomaly to be studied and contained. The constant prodding and examination wore me down, chipping away at what little remained of my humanity. I found myself retreating into my mind more and more, reliving memories of both my human past and my alien experiences. Sometimes, I wasn't sure which was real anymore. The strange melodic language that had replaced my ability to speak English became a source of both comfort and torment. In the privacy of my room, I'd sing to myself, the haunting alien tones echoing off the sterile walls. It was the only way I could express the turmoil inside me, the only connection I had left to that otherworldly experience that had forever changed me. One day, during yet another futile attempt at communication with a team of linguists, something unexpected happened. As I struggled to convey my frustration through a series of gestures and alien sounds, one of the younger researchers suddenly gasped. Her eyes widened, and she stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. The room erupted into chaos as she began to speak in the same melodic, otherworldly language that had become my only means of expression. Fear and excitement rippled through the team as they realized she could understand me. But their jubilation quickly turned to horror as they noticed the change in her eyes, the same iridescent sheen that marked my own transformation. Whatever had been done to me was spreading, transmitted through my desperate attempts to communicate. The facility went into immediate lockdown. Alarms blared, and I was quickly sedated and isolated. Through the haze of drugs, I caught glimpses of hazmat-suited figures and heard snatches of panicked conversations. Words like contagion, quarantine, and national security floated around me as I drifted in and out of consciousness. When I finally came to, I found myself in a new facility, even more secure and isolated than before. The walls were thicker, the surveillance more intense, and the personnel interacting with me were clearly terrified, despite their protective gear. I learned, through overheard conversations, that the young linguist who had momentarily understood me was now exhibiting the same physiological changes I had undergone. She, too, was being held in isolation, studied like a lab rat. The guilt was overwhelming. I had never meant to harm anyone. I just wanted to be understood, to connect with another human being again. But now I had condemned someone else to this lonely existence between worlds. Days blurred together in my new confinement. The tests continued, but now with an added urgency. I was no longer just a curiosity. I was a potential threat to humanity itself. The weight of this realization crushed me. I had survived war, had endured an alien abduction, but this, the idea that my very existence could endanger others, was almost too much to bear. As time passed in my isolated confinement, I began to experience strange episodes that blurred the line between reality and something else. It started with vivid dreams that felt more like memories or visions. I'd find myself back in that alien world, surrounded by those impossibly tall beings. But now, instead of fear, I felt a sense of belonging. The crystalline structures and liquid metal towers no longer seemed bizarre. They felt like home. These episodes began to bleed into my waking hours. Sometimes, in the middle of a test or interrogation, the room would shimmer and distort. For brief moments, I'd see overlays of alien technology integrated with the human equipment. The scientists' faces would morph, taking on characteristics of the beings that had abducted me. I tried to explain these experiences, but my alien language only caused more panic among my captors. They increased my medication, thinking I was hallucinating or trying to communicate some new threat. But I knew, deep down, that something fundamental was changing within me. One night, as I lay on my bed staring at the featureless ceiling, I felt a sudden, intense connection. It was as if a door had been opened in my mind, allowing me to sense beyond the confines of my room, beyond the facility, beyond Earth itself. I could feel the presence of the aliens who had taken me, their vast intelligence stretching across the cosmos. They were aware of me, aware of what had happened since my return. I sensed their curiosity, their concern, and something else. A call. They wanted me back. The realization both thrilled and terrified me. Part of me, the part that still clung to my humanity, recoiled at the idea. But another part, the part that had been irrevocably changed, yearned to answer that call. I was torn between two worlds, two identities, and the choice before me seemed impossible. As I grappled with this internal conflict, I became aware of a subtle change in my surroundings. The air in my room began to shimmer, just like it had in the desert all those months ago. The familiar kaleidoscope of colors started to form, twisting reality around me. Panic gripped me as I realized what was happening. They were coming for me, ready to take me back to that alien world. I wanted to shout, to alert the guards, but my voice only produced those haunting melodic tones. Alarms began to blare as the facility's sensors detected the anomaly, but it was too late. The shimmering air engulfed me, and I felt that now familiar sensation of my body stretching and distorting. As the human world dissolved around me, Replaced by the swirling vortex of interdimensional travel, a storm of emotions raged within me. Fear, excitement, regret, and anticipation all battled for dominance. In those final moments, as Earth faded from view, I caught a glimpse of hazmat-suited figures bursting into my room, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. I wanted to tell them that it was okay, that maybe this was for the best. I was a danger here, a walking contagion. Perhaps I truly belonged with those who had changed me. But there was no time for explanations or goodbyes. The vortex consumed me entirely, whisking me away to an unknown fate. As I hurtled through the cosmos, leaving behind everything I had ever known, one thought echoed in my mind. Would I ever see Earth again? And if I did, would there be anything human left in me to return to? The answers to these questions lay somewhere in the vast alien expanse that awaited me, in a journey that was only just beginning. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story. The Soldier's Starbound Destiny, Afghanistan, 2011. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but the weight of keeping it bottled up inside has become unbearable. It was 2011, and I was stationed in Afghanistan as part of a special ops team. Our missions were always hush-hush, you know. The kind of stuff that doesn't make it to the official reports. We were deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains, tracking some high-value targets. The air was thin, and the terrain was brutal. Every step felt like a gamble between solid ground and a potential landmine. The locals had warned us about caves in the area, ancient places that they said were cursed. We laughed it off, of course. We were trained soldiers, not superstitious villagers. But man, if I had known then what I know now, I would have listened to those warnings. It was on the third day of our operation when things started to get weird. We'd been pushing ourselves hard, sleeping in short bursts and living on stims and rations. The lack of proper rest was starting to mess with our heads, or at least that's what I told myself at first. I was on point, leading our squad through a narrow ravine when I spotted the cave entrance. It was partially hidden behind an outcropping of rocks, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Something about it made the hair on the back of my neck. Next stand up, I signaled the team to hold position while I took a closer look. As I approached, I could feel a strange vibration in the air, like the hum of electricity, but deeper, more primal. It seemed to resonate in my bones. I switched on my tactical light and stepped into the cave, my rifle at the ready. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rough stone walls covered in what looked like ancient carvings. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not Arabic, not Pashto, not any language I recognized. The symbols seemed to shift and move in the corners of my vision, but when I looked directly at them, they were still. It was disorienting, to say the least. I pushed deeper into the cave, the strange humming growing stronger with each step. That's when I saw it. A faint, bluish glow coming from around a bend in the tunnel. My training told me to fall back, to call for backup, but something else, something I couldn't explain, pulled me forward. As I turned the corner, my world turned upside down. There, in a small chamber, was a being that defied everything I thought I knew about reality. The creature stood about 7 feet tall, with a slender, almost ethereal build. Its skin was a pale blue, almost translucent. with a subtle shimmer that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the humming that filled the cave. But it was the eyes that really got me. Large, almond-shaped, and a deep, swirling black that seemed to contain entire galaxies. I should have been terrified. I should have raised my weapon or called for backup. But I didn't. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. It was like seeing an old friend after years apart, but multiplied by 1,000. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I was seeing, while every instinct in my body was screaming that this was somehow familiar. Time seemed to stretch and warp in that cave. I have no idea how long I stood there, locked in a silent stare with this impossible being. It made no move towards me, and I found myself lowering my weapon without even thinking about it. The humming in the air intensified, and I felt a pressure building in my head like someone was trying to push thoughts directly into my brain. Images flashed through my mind. Stars, planets, vast expanses of space, and other times, other lives. It was like remembering dreams I'd never had, or maybe forgotten lifetimes. I saw myself, or someone who looked like me, in strange, alien landscapes. I saw the blue being too in these visions. We were connected somehow. Partners, friends. I couldn't make sense of it all. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the crackle of my radio. One of my squad mates was calling for a status update. The sound snapped me out of whatever trance I'd been in, and the alien, because what else could I call it, seemed to react as well. It took a step back, its head tilting in a way that seemed almost sad, regretful. Before I could do or say anything, the blue glow intensified to a blinding level. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes, and when I lowered it, the being was gone. Just vanished. The humming stopped, and the cave was plunged into darkness save for my tactical light. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to search the cave to find some evidence that what I'd seen was real. But a deeper part knew that I wouldn't find anything. Whatever had happened here was beyond my understanding, beyond anything I'd been trained for. I stumbled out of the cave, my mind reeling from what I'd just experienced. My squad was waiting for me, concern etched on their faces. I must have looked like hell because they immediately started questioning me, asking if I was all right, if I'd encountered hostiles. I opened my mouth to tell them everything, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? Instead, I mumbled something about the cave being empty and suggested we move on. As we continued our mission, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The world around me seemed less real somehow, like a thin veil had been pulled back, revealing glimpses of something vast and incomprehensible beyond. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on our operation, but my mind kept drifting back to the cave and the blue being. The visions I'd experienced haunted my dreams, fragments of other lives and alien worlds. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, feeling like I was being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. My squad mates noticed the change in me. They chalked it up to the stress of the mission, the harsh conditions we were operating under. If only it were that simple. I started to notice strange things happening around me. Equipment would malfunction when I touched it, then work perfectly for someone else. I'd catch glimpses of impossible things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows moving against the wind, lights in the sky that didn't match any aircraft I knew of. It all came to a head on our last night in the field. We'd set up camp in a small valley, taking turns on watch. I volunteered for the midnight shift, hoping the quiet might help clear my head. As I sat there staring out into the darkness, I felt that familiar humming start to build in the air around me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that the lack of sleep was finally getting to me. But then I saw it, a soft blue glow on the horizon, pulsing gently. My heart started racing. I knew I should wake the others, sound the alarm, do something. But that pull I'd felt in the cave was back, stronger than ever. Before I knew what I was doing, I was on my feet, moving towards the light. I left my weapon, my gear, everything behind. Nothing mattered except getting to that glow. As I walked towards the light, the world around me began to shift and distort. The rocky terrain of Afghanistan seemed to melt away, replaced by landscapes I had only seen in my recent dreams. One moment I was trudging through sand. The next, I was walking on what felt like metal grating, then soft, spongy ground that pulsed beneath my feet. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with swirling mists that glowed with an inner light. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of coming home. It was as if every step was bringing me closer to where I truly belonged, even though I had no idea where that was. Suddenly, I found myself in a vast chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The walls, if you could call them that, were made of shifting, translucent panels that showed glimpses of stars and nebulae. In the center of this impossible room stood the blue being I had encountered in the cave. But it wasn't alone. There were others, dozens, maybe hundreds of them. Some looked similar to the first one I'd seen, while others were so alien I could barely comprehend their forms. They turned to look at me as I entered, and I felt the weight of countless ancient eyes upon me. The humming that had been my constant companion since the cave grew to a crescendo, and suddenly I understood. These weren't just random alien beings, they were us. Or rather, what we become. What I would become. Images and sensations flooded my mind faster than I could process. I saw the vast sweep of time, past, present, and futures beyond imagining. I saw humanity's journey to the stars, our evolution into beings of pure energy and thought. I saw cycles of creation and destruction on a cosmic scale, and our role in it all. And through it all, I saw myself, or rather, the being I would one day become. The blue skin, the eyes full of stars, the connection to something greater than I could have ever imagined in my human form. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. I wanted to run, to hide, to deny what I was seeing. But at the same time, I knew with absolute certainty that this was real, that this was my destiny. I don't know how long I stood there, absorbing this cosmic download of information. It could have been minutes or millennia. Time had lost all meaning in that place. When I finally came back to myself, I was on my knees, tears streaming down my face. The blue being, my future self, stood before me, its hand outstretched. I knew what it was offering. A chance to skip ahead, to leave my human life behind and join them now. Part of me wanted to take that hand so badly, to leave behind the pain, the limitations, the mundane struggles of human existence. But as I reached out, something held me back. Flashes of my life on Earth, My family, my friends, the experiences I had yet to live, all rushed through my mind. I realized that as tempting as it was, I wasn't ready. I still had a journey to make as a human. The being seemed to understand. It nodded, a gesture so human it almost made me laugh. Then it placed its hand on my forehead, and I felt a surge of energy course through me. In that moment, I understood that while I couldn't stay, I also couldn't go back to my old life as if nothing had happened. I had been changed, fundamentally and irrevocably. The being communicated to me not in words, but in pure thought and emotion. It told me that I would be needed, that the knowledge I had gained here would be crucial in the years to come. Humanity was approaching a crossroads, and I would play a part in guiding us towards our cosmic destiny. With that final message, the chamber began to fade away. The last thing I saw was the sea of alien faces, my future kin, watching me with what I can only describe as pride and anticipation. I came to at the edge of our camp just as dawn was breaking. My squad was in an uproar, searching for me. To them, I had simply vanished from my watch post hours ago. I had no explanation to give them that wouldn't have sounded completely insane. So I said nothing, letting them assume I had wandered off in some sort of stress-induced fugue state. But I knew the truth. In the days that followed, as we completed our mission and prepared to return to base, I struggled with what had happened to me. The visions, the knowledge, the sense of purpose. It was all still there, simmering just below the surface. I knew I couldn't stay in the military, couldn't go back to my old life. How could I, knowing what I now knew? So I made a decision. As soon as we landed back in the States, I disappeared. Not to another dimension this time, but into the vast anonymity of civilian life. I've spent the years since then preparing, studying, trying to understand the glimpses of the future I was shown. I don't know exactly what role I'm supposed to play or when I'll be called upon. But I do know this. What I experienced was real, and it was just the beginning. Humanity's future is out there among the stars, and somehow, some way, I'm meant to help us get there. If you're reading this, maybe you're part of that future too. Keep your eyes on the sky, and your mind open to the impossible. The universe is vaster and more wondrous than we can imagine. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.